Welcome to Bill's Aviation Podcast, where your stories are our stories. I'm a general aviation pilot, aviation writer, airplane builder, avionics developer, test pilot, and general screw-up. All stories feature Joe and his merry band of miscreants. The purpose of these stories is to educate and entertain pilots. If you have a story you'd like to share anonymously, please contact me. Today's story is titled Fuel Flow versus Fuel Quantity. Joe was taking his immaculate Cessna 182 for a multi-leg cross-country trip. Sitting in the right seat was his wife/co-pilot, Suzie-Q, who did a good job of making sure the baggage compartment was maxed out. Before departure, Joe performed his normal pre-flight and decided to top off both the main tanks and the extended range tanks. As Joe pulled up to the fuel pumps, he was met by a good friend and mechanic, Bob. Joe had known Bob since he started flying years before. It was Bob who helped Joe purchase the 182 and helps him perform owner-assisted annuals. Bob was being very helpful and scurried up the ladder to put fuel in the wing while Joe worked the credit card machine to pay for the soon-to-be dispensed fuel. Once the fuel started flowing, Bob quickly topped off the main and outboard tanks on the right wing, efficiently moving the ladder to the left wing, and did the same, replacing the fuel caps as he went. Joe sumped all 4 tanks, said farewell to Bob, climbed in, started up, performed his pre-flight checks, and departed. As they were planning a maximum duration flight to their first fuel stop, Joe was keeping a close eye on the fuel totalizer and the fuel level reported in each tank. Like most pilots, Joe was skeptical of the fuel quantity reported by the old-school Cessna fuel gauges. But for some reason, the left main tank was reporting significantly less fuel than the right tank, even though the fuel flow was reporting as expected. Rather than continuing on to his destination, Joe made the command decision to stop en route to manually dip his tanks. Although he trusted Bob with his life, he didn't trust Bob with Suzie-Q's life. After stopping at an airport that was along his route with reported low fuel prices, Joe pulled up to the pumps, grabbed the ladder, and set it next to the left main tank with the intention of using his expertly calibrated stick to dip the tanks. Upon climbing the ladder and reaching for the fuel cap, Joe noticed the long streak of blue fuel stain emanating from the fuel cap to the trailing edge of the wing. Removing the fuel cap, Joe noted that the rubber gasket was folded, which allowed the fuel in the tank to be sucked out. Upon dipping the tank, Joe found out almost all the fuel was gone, and when the fuel totalizer reported it should still have half a tank. Joe topped off the tanks, unkinked the gasket, carefully replaced the fuel cap, and noted the increase in fuel quantity in each tank. Maybe the fuel gauge is more accurate than I thought, Joe mentioned to no one in particular. Lesson learned: while fuel totalizers are good tools, they only tell you part of the story, and that part doesn't include possible fuel leaks. It is imperative pilots use the information from the working fuel gauges and the fuel flow meters to accurately assess the quantity of fuel remaining. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please hit the like button and subscribe by clicking on the logo in the lower right of your screen. If you really like what you've heard, please help support this channel and become a Patreon. Part of each donation will go to aviation safety and aviation youth programs. Be sure to check out next week's story about Joe listening to a Cessna 310 pilot trying to talk to a J3 pilot on the radio.